Can we talk about investments to be made in the Latinx communities and Black and Brown communities generally that would prevent criminal justice involvement to begin with, that would better support individuals rather than criminalizing public health concerns or issues like drug addiction?
So in order to invest in the Latinx communities, Black and Brown communities, we need to invest in the education and job training. We also need to invest in the mental health and substance abuse services that are underfunded right now. Affordable housing, which right now the rents, people can't afford rents even without being Latinx. The prices are just insane. And the programs out here are lotteries, and it's just not working the right way. The community-based programs, which when I was a kid, they used to have community centers, they used to have a lot of things that you could to go, and now you have to pay for all of these things. So the communities don't have anywhere for the children to go, a safe place after school. And the re-entry programs for people formerly incarcerated like myself, when you come home with all the restrictions and everything, you can wind up in a bad predicament because the only re-entry programs are funded by non-for-profits such as Fortune Society, Exodus, Center for Community Alternatives, and others, Osborne, that are helping the formerly incarcerated, but all of that is non-for-profits, and the money is not there for more re-entry programs. And then the public health concerns, like substance abuse and the disorders, they're just sending people to the hospitals, and they're not really helping them with their addictions or with their illnesses, and people are winding up back incarcerated instead of being helped for their mental illness or their drug addiction, and they just keep recycling back into the system.
Thank you, Ismael. Telly, I'd like to turn it over to you now. You wrote an article on the role of progressive prosecutors and the role they play in mitigating the impact of the outsized immigration consequences on non-citizens who have been arrested or may be convicted of a crime. Could you share 2 or 3 top-line priorities for prosecutors who can mitigate these dire consequences?
Sure. So, I think there are so many, but I'll just highlight on a few. How much local prosecutors, how much power they have in sort of stopping this system before it starts, stopping these horrific consequences that we're hearing about, people being sent to Buffalo or maybe Texas, far from their families, and deported out of sight. So there are things that local prosecutors can do and are doing throughout the country, but really, I would say not enough from what I saw in my research and writing this article. So I'll say like 3 major buckets I think that can be worked on. The first is, and I know much of this is being done in criminal justice reform in general, but the impact for immigration specifically. So I think reevaluating charging practices is essential. Overcharging, we know, is a huge problem, has been a huge problem, where people are overcharged for crimes that are not necessarily, even made out necessarily by the factual allegations, or just historically we know things were charged extremely broadly. I think, again, and I know there's been lots of efforts to do this, but reducing that practice, continuing to, eliminate overcharging and insisting upon that throughout the country, I think would have a very big impact, given that these documents, again, trace an immigrant through their entire proceedings, follows them even if a case is dismissed. The other thing with respect to charging, we've seen, and again, there's been unfortunately a backlash against prosecutors trying to do things like this, but engaging in declination practices or prosecutorial nullification, not charging certain quality of life offenses, things like that, that would have a huge impact for immigration and others also obviously who are being arrested and criminalized for poverty throughout our country. And we've seen prosecutors do this where certain categories of offenses are just not being charged and not being criminalized. That seems like something that I would hope could be pursued and continue to be pursued. And then I would just say, and this in New York City I think is less of a problem, but throughout the country, access to diversion, and I know there are many problems with, we heard some of the problems with the treatment model earlier and other things, but allowing non-citizens to participate in diversion is so essential. There are a number of jurisdictions, I don't think as much in New York City, where migration status may impact your ability to participate in alternatives to incarceration. That is obviously hugely problematic for many reasons that I believe everyone in this room would agree with. And also not requiring pleas before someone participates in this kind of program. I can't say enough how detrimental that could be to a non-citizen who would participate in a program, successfully complete the case, but unfortunately under immigration law, that would still be a conviction. So that's like small fixes that I hope could be palatable to some prosecutors, and happy to have more conversations about that. And the last piece, I think, is really understanding, and my article talks more about this if you are interested in this or work with prosecutors, but just to say that prosecutors absolutely have a role to play in mitigating immigration consequences, but the real obligation constitutionally lies with the defense counsel under the Padilla decision from the Supreme Court, and that prosecutors should not be supplanting the advice of immigration counsel or defense counsel as to what is most advisable for someone's immigration consequence. So they can still be engaged and try to mitigate, but it's really not a role to sort of say what is the best outcome, because the immigration consequence is so unique and specific to each person. So I think those are three guiding principles that prosecutors could start to use to help really, reduce this detrimental pipeline.
Thank you, Talia. Ismael, could you speak to language access and how that hinders individuals' ability to engage in important and necessary programs, particularly as it relates to ATIs, and what could community-based organizations need to better support community members who may not speak English as their primary language?
So the language access is critical because if you can't speak the language and you go into court or you're getting arrested, there's no way for you to know what's going on. You're just going to follow what they tell you to do. And what they need to do is understand program requirements, so the LEP individuals struggle to understand the eligibility criteria. And then the program requirements, they need to hire more people and make a program so that we can start making sure they have translators and explain these things to individuals so that they're not just going along and taking these deals in court that can really be detrimental and end them up in prison and then or deported at the same time, and allow them to navigate the legal system. And then they need to be effectively communicating and not just translating just certain words. They need to be able to translate the legal stuff so that they can understand, if I take this deal, this is what's going to happen to me, and not just explain to them basic words. They need to really be able to explain to them the fine details, because even speaking English, we can all end up taking a deal that's not good for us.
Thank you. I believe we have questions now from the audience, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Can we get a mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry to use my privilege here, but two things on the language access. I think it's really important. New York State has a very serious and complex and purposeful language access policy, and that is available to everyone, whether or not they are citizens. So I would encourage all of you to download that information, so no one should be sitting there trying to determine a future, because we offer that service through Department of Labor, I think is where it's housed. Secondly, the question I have for this panel, which has been wonderful, thank you, is this. So outside of the actual immigration, cases, which you've described perfectly, for most Latinos in the United States who may or may not understand immigration, I think they need some talking points. Like, what are the 3 talking points that they can offer in a room where they're being bombarded with this migrant language or this other thing? What are the 3 things you want, Latinos in this country to be able to spew back at people who are spewing hate at them?
I'll open it up to anyone on the panel.
Well, definitely also the stigma that only Latinos are undocumented. That's another thing. In this community, which I live in Hell's Kitchen, we have a lot of people, blue eyes, white skin, who speak English from Ireland, who are undocumented. Nobody stopped them, right? So we definitely, I remember I was very active in the National Organization for Women, and what we used to do, especially in bathroom, when you close the door, we used to put what languages in case when you are driving cross country, somebody stop you, what to say, who to call. I think we need to initiate a campaign where people know the recourses that are there. And also, I see 16 and 17-year-olds that are stopped, and they made them confess to things that they haven't done. So we had to let our high school students, our students to know, my parents are not here, or my guardians are not here, stay quiet. So it's little things like that that we had to start practicing, you know. And I do a lot of speaking in school, especially in George Washington High School and some of the school in El Barrio, because we had to make our young people aware. The other thing that I tell young people, don't walk around with the two things in your ear. Just put one. Because if the police stop and you don't stop, they're going to shoot you in the back. Because you didn't listen. You were, doing something else. So little things like that are very helpful, And parents don't give up. Because also, we had to repeat. I had 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters, 2 grandchildren. And you have to repeat and repeat and repeat until it gets to them. But we all have a responsibility to make sure that people in general are aware and educate the rest of the population. Everyone, unless you are Native American, you are an immigrant. Everyone here. So these things about, I call recent arrival. When I hear people say, oh, these people are coming, I say, oh, sure, yeah, you are here already, eating, with a nice apartment, So, like I said before, we're here because of the policy of the United States in our country. Globally, Angola, there's a big war in Angola. As an Afro-Latina, I look out for my black people, okay? You go to El Chocó in Colombia, you go to Haiti, Haitians are deported from Miami back to Haiti. So we have to start talking about this in the public. You're not going to see this in Telemundo and Univision or any of the Spanish people, very rarely. So who pays the media? Who's in charge of the media?
I love this question. It's terrific. And it's hard to pick 3, but I'm going to try. The first I would say is that the border crisis is completely manufactured. It's by design, building on a little bit of what Zenaida was saying. The U.S. policy over decades has been to force migrants to come through a very, very, very dangerous route to the United States. That's why there has been so many deaths, and it's absolutely by design to force people to come to Latin America, walk for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from all over the world to come to this extremely dangerous, narrow port of entries along the border where they're facing unbelievably horrific danger within Mexico and to come to the United States. So I think the border crisis is manufactured. Migration has always existed in the United States, is foundational, has always existed around the world, and it's absolutely manufactured. And I don't want to say again the points that Naida made that are so excellent about U.S. foreign policy, why this has happened, but the border crisis is deliberately created by the United States, and the reason people are where they are is because of how we have built certain walls and navigated and pushed people to come to a certain place where they are literally dying to get here. That's first. I think second, and this is, I know was said before, but I can't help but say that seeing what's happening in the media, that immigrants do not commit crime at any higher rate than citizens. In fact, it's much lower. It's well documented. There's a lot of data on this point, but I do feel like this, if it has to be said and repeated over and over again, and it's absolute like rhetoric and bullshit. So excuse my language. And third, I think the other point that I think needs to be emphasized, to your point that there are like other people that are here that say, oh, well, I came this way or my family came that way. You cannot get visas to come to the United States in many places in Latin America. It's nearly impossible to come due to what Juan was talking about earlier about the visas, the quota system, and I won't bore you with all of the detail. Happy to talk about it later. But it is not possible to come the right way to come via a visa and to come into the United States. It is nearly impossible for most countries in Latin America, given our current immigration system. So there is no way to come. There is no way except to, and I think Zenaida's point is a good one to end on, take your child, or if you're pregnant, and walk for 6 months. No one is doing that unless they are desperate and fleeing horrific circumstances. And, I always think and say, I've been an immigration attorney for 15 years doing deportation defense. I really do believe if people sat in on an intake interview that I do with a client who's in detention, facing deportation, and heard why they're coming to the United States, forget the definition of it. I really think things would be different in this country if people actually heard narratives and met people. And I think that's part of the solution with the media too, drawing people to actually listening to real stories, actually understanding what migration is and what it looks like, and reclaiming that narrative.
Thank you.
Alleviating the consequences of justice involvement. What is being done to decrease their caseloads, to train them, and what should be done, and what models exist out there that New York should be looking at? Thank you.
I can't really speak to in terms of alleviating. So the question was for those at home, I can repeat, that what's being done to sort of alleviate the extreme caseloads for defense counsel, and that obviously given attorneys' roles is so important here, what's being done. So I can't really speak to efforts. There's other people in the room that I think can talk on a state level or what's being done in the city to sort of navigate that. I can talk about from the perspective of training attorneys as to immigration consequences, and so that they're well aware. I can just speak to that really quickly. There's a number of, most New York City public defenders at this point actually all have embedded immigration practices where there's immigration attorneys that will work with defenders to help them provide this advice. You're not expected to do it on your own. And I'll say throughout the state, there's an organization called the Immigrant Defense Project, which is an incredible organization that has a hotline that's available for attorneys from anywhere around the country, in fact, but to call to get advice to make sure that your role as a defense attorney is resolving the case in the best way possible for the non-citizen to not face some of these consequences. And I know the 18B panel, someone was talking, there's lawyers whose job it is to help you with that, but I can't really speak to caseloads, but there are services, but unfortunately not enough throughout the country, and there needs to be more, but this is a model that's being adopted, at least vis-a-vis immigration consequences, pretty much throughout the country.
Hi, so I've been studying a bit about immigration and the historical pattern and what we're seeing today in politics and the shift towards the right-wing way of thinking about it. And I noticed that the majority of immigrants previously came from European countries. So like 4 out of 5 of the top ethnic groups that have come to the US, they were from European countries, and now there's this push to block people coming from the border that's often from, like we're saying, Latin American countries. So what, like you were saying that there should be ways of bringing migrants here from those countries that doesn't force them to come through the border. And so how can we make that the dominant narrative politically, that, hey, they shouldn't be forced to come to the border and then be treated in these horrible ways, and then have the conversation be closing the border, when in the 1920s, people were coming by boat and they were coming with visa programs and whatever the programs were back then. So how can we open up these same programs that were afforded to the European migrants to migrants from these other places?
Well, let me tell you, if we allow people to come here and work and be able to go back, people will come here, work 6 months, and go back. But once you work here undocumented, then you're stuck over here because you cannot go back. So open the damn border for everybody. Give people permission to work. Solution.
Just wanted to go back to the topic we were talking about, media and giving voice to those who don't have voices. So coming from two parents, undocumented, came to this country a while ago when they were young as well, around younger than my age. Currently, how can we bring these topics that are uncomfortable and taboo in our communities to talk about why are you here, you know, you have rights, et cetera, when at the same time it's like, no, we shouldn't be talking about this. I'm not gonna talk about, you know, the stereotype is like, in Spanish, no traigas tus trapos sucios en público, like don't talk about things that happen at home in public. So how can we, as advocates in this generation, bring these conversations into our households to then bring it to the public and to legislation to hear, like, this is what's really going on. This is how our community feels when our community doesn't feel comfortable or safe to talk about it because they feel like there's gonna be that, like, reprimand or immigration is gonna be called on me, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I have to tell you, let me tell you a secret. Immigration doesn't have enough agents to send to your house. Okay? When I worked for Congressman Rango, I used to tell people, you get a letter from immigration, come here. Go to your congressperson. Go to your federal senator, and they can advocate for you. But you see, they don't tell you that you can go and do that. That's why we pay their salary. That's why we have a congressperson in your district to represent you. And the main thing that they're supposed to do is immigration, Social Security, everything they have to do with the federal government. All right? Remember, when we had the war in El Salvador, the United States used to fuel all the arms to El Salvador. They gave visa. Why am I here? The United States gave 25,000 visas a year to Dominican Republic because of the invasion of 1965. So there are negotiations that we can do, but the president of those countries don't give a shit about us. Okay? So what this forum should have been the whole week. As you can see, the panel prior to us, all right, all the information. This is a great venue, you know, John Jay College, and all the CUNY colleges. So we need to have these conversations. The first, second generation, like my daughter, the father is from Puerto Rico. I'm Dominicans. They don't tell me, no, I say my dad is from Puerto Rico, my mother is from Dominican Republic. To make sure what they are. And they are Afro-Latina. Well, let's talk about that too. The census, Dr. Nancy Lopez, a professor in New Mexico, we fought in court because they wanted to they didn't want to count the Afro-Latinos in the census. We're already invisible. Look at this room. I'm the only black Latina in all of this panel. I'm sorry. Basically, a lot of light-skinned Latina identify as Afro-Latinas. But you have to also take that in consideration, the racism within the Latino community. Whether you are indigenous, which we have a lot of people from South America who are indigenous, and from Mexico. They don't want to say that they're indigenous because they are ashamed, they shamed. So we have to start having this conversation and platform. So MNN and public access is the right venue. And you can do it, once you do a program with us, it's your program, you can put it in whatever platform you want. No commercial, so no interruption to sell anything, which is important. And this year, we train over 1,000 young people. And when I say young, between 14 to 100 and something, okay, 70, because everyone is welcome. We have a lot of communicators from Latin America who would love to have their own programs. We offer that, you know, in any of the public access center, which is important. You know, and like I say, tune, you know, we have Punto de Vista with Carlos Cabrera, who is an excellent. I have a new program with Margarita Lopez, the former city councilwoman, Feminismo Global. I have a program with Malin Falou, who was 25 years in Wado. and 10 years in HIV. So giving voice to those, they retire, say, no, you cannot retire with your experiences, okay? We have Jill Reddles, who teach here at John Jay, okay? Radical imagination, like I mentioned. So there are a lot of information out there. We just have to tune off, leave this alone, or look for something that is educational, informative in this. Not just church, merengue, salsa, no. But this is important. So having that conversation, like I said, the young people talking to their parents, to their grandparents, why are we here? What happened in our countries? We don't know our own history. Then we come here, and now our history is not in the book anymore. If you live in Florida, you're not going to find our history in the book. Okay? Aquí se habló español antes de hablar inglés. Tenemos que estar claros con eso.
And
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, you're saying you want to make change, so everyone needs to reach out to the organizations that are doing the advocacy and go into the legislators where they don't teach at certain homes. Even when I was a child, they don't tell us that we can go to the legislator's office and we can sit down and we can talk to them. So you reach out to the organizations that are fighting for immigration reform bills and get the information, and it's all about education. So you need to learn it, and then you need to teach it.
Thank you. I believe we have a few more minutes for some additional questions.
This one over here.
I am a future U.S. presidential candidate. I'm being interviewed this week for the elections. And I represent the Latin community, the poor community, being a female, having a disability, and representing the prison system. My husband is a Dominican Republican immigrant, and he served in the prison, and he was given a second chance at life. We represent the new generation and the defense of humanitarian rights for our country, guys. And I was given all these privileges from the community and the country, and we have a situation here is a very big misunderstanding. Having all these legal authorities grant me this interview, the court got information that was inaccurate, and they took my children and they put them up for adoption. And they're saying, Ms. Alameda, you can do this interview for the presidency, but your children are being kept. So I don't know where in the system is it that me being Latin is different from the original presidential candidates, the males in the White House, that I'm in this situation. Just saying.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone have any additional questions or comments? Do we have any on the Zoom? I know folks are dialing virtually as well, and I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging those folks. No? Okay, thank you. I'd like to give a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you.
Let's give them another warm round of applause. One of the things I wanted to acknowledge is that we have about 64 people that's still online for this event. That's significant because there were about 84 people or so early this morning, which is a minor drop. And that's indicative of how important, incredibly important this work is. So we want to acknowledge everybody for staying, those who are online, those who are here. We're going to continue on with our panel. At this point, when I think about this work and I think about people who are committed to it, this person comes to mind. I've known them for many, many years, right? I know we old. May not look old. I think we old. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I've known this person for many, many years, right? He's a good friend of mine. He's my brother. Someone who's in leadership and doing this work who's going to moderate our next panel. And that's none other than my friend and my brother, the Deputy CEO of the Fortune Society, Rob DeLeon. Let's bring him on with a warm round of applause to moderate this next panel.
Thank you, Andre. That's my brother doing this thing here at IJO at John Jay College. I think all day long we've acknowledged so many people, and we haven't acknowledged Andre for his leadership in all of this, so I want to give him a round of applause. Thank you, brother. So I have the distinct honor of moderating the next and final panel, and this is a timely conversation given the current political atmosphere. And so thank you, John Jay. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this. And before I bring everyone up, I just wanted to say that as a formerly incarcerated person, as a formerly incarcerated leader, in doing this kind of work, I always try to invoke the presence of individuals who did this work before us. Earlier on one of the panels, there was some data presented about communities of focus when it comes to criminal legal system involvement. And in the mid-'80s, there were a group of men at Green Haven Correctional Facility who did some research and made a report about communities that were focused on by criminal justice involvement by authorities. They were called the Green Haven Think Tank. So I just want to invoke the presence of brothers like the late, great Eddie Ellis, the late, great Lukman White, Larry Lukman, and of folks like my Boricua, fellow Boricua, Martin Sustre, for the work that folks have done over the years for criminal legal system reform. So thank you all. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. First, we have the Honorable Catalina Cruz, who is the New York State Assembly member of the 39th District. Next, we have Andrea Nieves, supervising attorney, the policy team at New York County Defenders. And finally, my long-term friend and colleague, Giselle Castro, the CEO at Exalt Youth. We're going to start with a question for everyone on the panel, and we'll go from my left to my right. And the question is, can each of you share what criminal legal system reforms or policies or solutions or programming ideas are pending, that are already being worked on to mitigate racially disparate outcomes for Black and brown New Yorkers, particularly with the Latina population, and what are their main goals? Before we go on, I'm just going to say really quick, I said Latinas very, very deliberately. So recently I was in Puerto Rico, I was at Loíza, and a friend of mine who runs an organization down there is named El Ancon. He talked about how the Latinx word, and this is, of course, him and some of the brothers down there, said it's a little torpe, which means a little clumsy for them to say or clunky. And he said that there's a word, or there's a way of saying a word without a gender emphasis, which is the same as the word estudiantes, that means student in Spanish, and there's no gender emphasis. So he said Latines, and that some folks are saying that. So if you hear me saying that, I'm being very deliberate. I've seen others using it. So I'm sorry. I hope you guys didn't lose sight of the question. Assembly member, I can ask it again if you want to.
No, I got the question. Can you hear me? All right. First of all, it's always good to be home. I am an alumni of John Jay. And I get the honor of now representing my community in the New York State Assembly, parts of Queens, Jackson Heights, Corona, Elmhurst. And so anytime I get invited here, I've been here, I think I was here last week, a couple of weeks before that. I love coming to John Jay for a number of reasons. They are great partners. So in thinking about what you said, some of the policies that I'm working on that are going to greatly impact the Latinx community. I don't know if you've heard of Clean Slate, but it was my baby. It's our baby. And I say ours because my chief of staff was back here, and I always give her credit. It's because I don't come from the criminal defense world. I don't come from the criminal justice world. I come from the immigration and labor world. But in working with someone, she's a former criminal defense attorney, I've learned so much about how our injustice system impacts the community. And we've done great work in partnership with folks like you to pass policies and legislation that are really going to change the lives of folks. For people who may not be familiar with it, Clean Slate is a piece of landmark legislation. I venture to say we have the best version nationally, and it is a law that would seal the records of certain folks who have proven over and over for 3 or 8 years, depending on if it's a misdemeanor or a felony, that they are deserving of a second chance. That means a second chance at housing, so that you don't have to apply for 20 apartments before someone actually gives you a chance to live in one. For a real job, one that pays, for a professional license, so that you can actually be that better person you've been working to be, in spite of a mistake you may have made 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. You are a very different person now than you were 5 years ago, and if you have proven that to the world and the community, why shouldn't we give you another chance? And so this is an important bill. It comes into effect in the next couple of weeks, and then that means in about 3 years' time, all of the records that up to now have qualified for sealing will be sealed completely, because it's 2.3 million records. And so that's important, because it's going to create a more level playing field. At the time that someone who looks like one of us walks into a place and is trying to apply for a job or apply for housing, something that doesn't really happen right now. The other piece of that, and it's where John Jay has been a great partner, is the programs that help support the implementation of Clean Slate. We have allocated money in the budget for John Jay to do pre-decarceration education around this, to make sure that when people are getting out of prison, are getting out of jail, they know that this is what's at stake. That by the time they leave, if they stay out of trouble, whatever amount of time is required, they're going to have their record sealed and they're going to get another chance. And it incentivizes, the hope is that it's going to incentivize people to look for other avenues. But it's not just on people. We as government, as the people who are leading the state, have a responsibility to create those avenues, to create those workforce development programs, to support those workforce development programs. We help fund one, the name is escaping me right now, but every year they do great work out of the School of Labor. It is the CUNY School of Labor, how could I forget that? And they go into our prison system and educate people about their rights. And what are your rights when you get out, in reference to finding work. So there's a lot of things that are out there. Not all of them are getting funded to the level that we wish they were. And I do want to give a shout out to, I've called you Secretary of State for so long that is now Commissioner, but my dear friend Rosana, who is possibly one of the state's utmost authorities on how do we do this right? How do we actually prepare people to get out, to have work, to live a better life? And it's the simplest form that I can find to describe how amazing you are. And so if you don't know her, you need to get to know her. And I think, you know, in the next state budget, because we are putting an emphasis on Clean Slate, we're going to be looking at other funding sources and programs that we need to put in place so that it isn't just let's seal the record. It's also let's seal the record and prepare you to continue to live a life of productivity.
I just want to say really quickly that myself and a few others in the room will benefit from Clean Slate. So thank you for your strong advocacy on that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Assemblymember, for championing that bill for so many years. It was certainly a labor of love, and we all appreciate that effort because it was a lot of effort to make that bill happen, which is often the case when we're talking about criminal legal system reform. Takes a long time. You got to get down and dirty in the fight. That's what Assemblymember Cruz is so good at doing. So I'm going to talk about a couple of reforms, and if I mention any that you want to talk about, just let me know.
That's okay. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
So the place that I would start in terms of thinking about criminal legal system reform, especially with the intersection of Latinx communities, there's a document called the Justice Roadmap New York. I would recommend anybody who's interested to check out this document. There are a lot of assembly members and senators who've signed on to the whole slate. I'm pretty sure the assembly member here right next to me has signed on to the whole slate, but it's got a long list of bills that address this intersection. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them today. in the ways that they impact Latinx communities in particular. And I'll note that they, in many ways, a lot of these build on the work of Clean Slate. You know, Clean Slate is a ceiling statute. It doesn't do everything, but there's a lot of pieces that are left open that I want to talk about. So the first is called the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act. If you want the bill numbers, again, you can find them on the Justice Roadmap, NewYork.org website. It passed both houses, but the governor vetoed it. It would create a working pathway to exoneration. Okay, but like, what does that mean? Basically, you know, when people are innocent or have been wrongfully convicted, they need a mechanism to go back into court and to clear their name. The mechanism that we have in New York is really desperately in need of an overhaul in order to bring us in line with other states. How does that affect Latinx community as well? In two ways in particular, right? The first is that there is a constitutional rule. Professor Peleg was talking about this, Padilla v. Kentucky, where, you know, people have the right to immigration advice to let them know whether or not they could be deported or have immigration consequences. That rule went into effect in 2010. But all the people who were being advised or not advised before that time may have taken convictions. Right now, we have this legal mechanism where people can go back and vacate those convictions and say, I didn't know that I was going to get deported. But because of all of the problems with this statute that this legislation would fix, you know, this would go a long way into ensuring that people who are facing deportation, facing other collateral consequences, would have an easier time of getting back into court in the ways that they do in other states. So that's a really important key for the Latinx community on that bill. Another piece that bill would do is, I don't know if many of you recall, but in 2019, Governor Cuomo finally, after many years of vetoing a bill, agreed to decriminalize gravity knife convictions. So gravity knives were, you know, basically a kind of flip-out pocket knife that you could purchase legally at Home Depot because they would sell them, or whatever hardware store on the street. You go and buy it, and then a police officer sees you with it, and they would arrest you, and they would prosecute you. And we had thousands of these cases in Manhattan.
Lots of construction workers.
And exactly, that's exactly it. It was lots of construction workers. What they found when they looked at the data, the law was actually found unconstitutional. Governor Cuomo was forced to decriminalize this only because the courts had already said it was unconstitutional because they were targeting Latinos. Because people were coming home from work, from their job, using with their tool, in their tool belt, they would see them on the subways, they would stop them, they would arrest them. In Manhattan, if they had a prior conviction for this, they would charge them with a felony. People went to prison for carrying the work tools that they bought at any store, that they needed to do their work. That was not a defense. Unconstitutional, decriminalized, but what does that mean for all the people prior to 2019, the thousands and thousands of people, many disproportionately Latinos, even more disproportionate than in all the other kinds of convictions we see? What do those people do? There's no legal mechanism to vacate those convictions. So that's why this Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act would fix that, because when they decriminalized the law, that was for going forward. What about all the people who are facing deportation, have all these collateral consequences for the statute that was unconstitutional? So the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act, among many other things, would address those two pieces that I think really apply to Latinos. Professor Peleg also mentioned judicial diversion. And she said, hey, one of the issues that we're noticing is that non-citizens are precluded from participating in diversion. So what does all that mean? Basically, we have treatment courts that exist in every county across the state. By statute, we have a drug court in every county. Some counties have mental health courts, some do not. It's a very diverse landscape. Some are better than others. Some counties, many counties, have no mental health courts at all. Only about half of the counties do. Well, as Talia pointed out, right now, because these mental health courts exist outside of a statutory framework, that means that that the courts, basically the prosecutors, get to decide who gets to participate in these courts. And they require an upfront plea. And as Professor Peleg explained, if you require that upfront plea, a non-citizen cannot take that plea, which means they cannot participate in most mental health courts in this state. Bronx being a real standout for allowing people to participate in those courts without taking a plea. Brooklyn does it sometimes, Manhattan a little bit, and most of the rest of the state. First of all, half the state doesn't have these courts. The other half, they just say, no, you can't participate. You have to plead guilty. And so that excludes non-citizens from participating in mental health court. Somebody has a mental illness. We know they can get treatment. We know they should avoid a prison sentence. And we don't have a statute on the books that would allow non-citizens to participate in that. So we strongly encourage everyone to take a look at the Treatment Not Jail Act. So Professor Peleg, you have the idea, we're working on it, we're trying to in Manhattan as well. So this is actually a bill that passed both houses. We are, thanks in large part to Fortune Society's championship, and we are very hopeful / optimistic that the governor will sign it, so please support that. It's a simple fix. Most other states already do this. They would still go through the jury voir dire process. There's still going to be a decision made on an individual basis, same as anyone, whether or not it's appropriate for them to serve on this jury. But right now, they don't even get in the door. Or what's worse is they do get in the door. They still get the summons, and they ask everybody who has a criminal conviction to stand up and walk out. And you see the room empty out of Black people, of Latinx people. It's humiliating. And so this is something that we've been fighting for a long time, and it finally passed this year. We'll see if it gets signed into law. We're going to keep working on that. Then I would just raise, just briefly, 2 city campaigns. One is the ICE Out Coalition. This is for, it would amend the New York City detainer law at the city council level. So back in 2014, the city council passed laws limiting when the NYPD and Department of Correction will honor an ICE detainer and whose information they could share with ICE. This was a landmark transformation. For those of you who maybe worked in the courts prior to 2014, you will remember, people, many years ago, I worked in California, and we would get we had 2 cases the summer that I worked in this law firm of 2 kids who had jumped turnstiles in New York City. They didn't have ID on them, 16-year-old kids. They didn't have ID, so they were arrested. Their prints were ran. They were non-citizens. These 2 16-year-olds were shipped across the country to California to youth detention facilities for turnstile jumps to be deported, because they were undocumented. And this was happening all the time, right? People would jump a turnstile, would be caught with marijuana, whatever, and...
24-hour rule.
The
20. I just, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I helped write the detainer bill back when I actually practiced law back then. The practice was, in practitioners had a 24-hour rule. So if your client was in the barracks for more than 24 hours, you can forget about it. If your client was undocumented, 24 hours, gone. And so, because what would happen is the prints would go into the system, and if they were in there for more than 24 hours, it would ping the ICE system, they'd come pick them up, and they were gone. And this was before there was a trial. This was before you could even figure out what the charges were. Forget about actually getting them out on bail. There was nothing like that. Yeah, they were gone.
Yeah.
And this was a huge issue. We fought and won at the city council to get this detainer law passed in 2014. Now, a decade later, we see all the holes with the existing detainer law. There's a campaign being fought at the city council level to improve the bill, close the loopholes, really make it very clear that they cannot be calling ICE. You can't do that. That's not what the law says. So, we would encourage people to continue to fight for that. One of the other things that one of these bills does is it creates a private right of action. So right now we have this law in the books, But let's say they don't do what they're supposed to do, and you do get deported or you do get picked up. What do you do about that? Well, right now you can complain to your city council member, but you can't sue. And that this law would provide that. So that would be huge. And then the last thing I'll just add, you know, in the New York Times yesterday they were talking about the jaywalking law that just passed at the city council. So we've decriminalized jaywalking. You can no longer get a criminal summons as of 120 days from now. And I'm just going to read you what the Times reported yesterday. Jaywalking laws historically used to target Black and Latino residents were not evenly enforced in New York. What a surprise. And the council bill was primarily a racial justice measure. About 92% of the 463 people who received summons last year for crossing a street against a signal were Black or Latino, according to city records. So we're still doing this work, because what we're still seeing is, you know, these disparities in enforcement. So I'll stop there. Again, check out the Justice Roadmap New York for a really long list of really wonderful bills.
Thank you, Andrew.
I don't know if this is on. I want to thank you for that overview. You know, as I was listening to you, I am, and I'm sure that you all are probably processing the same thing, which is it's like how deeply systemic our policy, our structures are. And within this process, I went into the restroom and I had a break and I said to Anna, she was like, what happened? And I said, my God, sometimes when you pick up your head and you look up to the horizon, you get to see the magnitude of all of the challenges, but the great news is that we're making substantial progress. So the policies that at Exalt we are supporting, and we work with young people who are justice system involved, ages 15 through 19, and I deeply believe that they are the voice of where we're headed and the future. The challenge and the disconnect always is this, that they don't know, that they are not well informed. So they have been big proponents of the raise the age, first advocating, but then also the implementation. And I want to take us back into what we did in the past, because many of you are here doing the work. But one of the most important aspects of the work that we did was that our young people created a documentary with the university, and that was the point that you were raising. How is it that we engage, you know, those who are not part of this group, those who are considering entering law school and potentially creating policies? They created a documentary that is still on our website, and the actual unveiling of this documentary was at Google, with a lot of executives that had no idea on the raise the age. What happened from that point is that we start to open up internship opportunities for our young people. They begin to change civic engagement and the way that this New York City begins to understand the complexities of the system. I also want to highlight that within the work that they have done, and thank you, Assemblywoman, they have supported the Clean Slate as well. They have gone, you know, up to Albany. They have gone with Youth Represent as well. And now they are thinking about, you know, the other process of the raise the age, which is the Youthful Offender Act. What I begin to highlight here is that there cannot be a disconnect between, and I know that with us, there's not a disconnect between the work that we're doing and that implementation process, and also not leaving those behind that will be impacted. And the other thing that I'm always very conscious of when I think about policies, when I think about system, when I think about reform, it is that we're the ones who are creating these policies. We're trying to reverse, we're trying to create new conditions, but we have said throughout this entire morning that then those who are impacted by the system, they do not have the vocabulary, they may not understand our system, and what we get to see very slightly within our justice system, this is family court, criminal court, and Supreme Court. I have the pleasure of meeting with all of the judges in New York City, and I get to hear, you know, their concerns as well as individuals who are aiming to thoughtfully, carefully, and responsibly implement, you know, some of these policies. What they begin to highlight is this, that they too have barriers. They don't know where to send a young person who may be impacted by the system. Within the complexities, there is a real, I would say, an opportunity, a vision, and something that I have been working on in Washington, D.C., which is ensuring that over in Washington, that they are creating opportunities to provide discretionary funding for alternative to incarceration program. That is also a barrier. It's not necessarily a reform issue. I think that what I want to draw here is that as organization like an Exol is thinking about the future, the impact that we have already. We have a lot of young people who are walking into our organization. They're not trusting the system, but if they're impacted through migration issues, if they're speaking Spanish, their parents are fearful. So what we're doing is that we're bridging trust, but then that relationship with the court system is one where we also know that it needs to be supported. It needs to also be funded. I think that, and not that I think, I know this very well, there has to also be a process, and we don't have a roadmap for those who are implementing. How is it that we effectively implement? Because a policy is a policy, the implementation is the one that begins to also inform what is the data, what is the information that we get to see, and then circle back so that we can make this refinements. But I just wanted to highlight from our perspective the work that we have been doing, supporting advocacy efforts, reform on a different level, which is supporting through dollars. But I also want to give credit, to Commissioner Rosado, who has been a staunch, advocate, and within conversations that we have been having, that she's also leading an initiative, the organization is scaling. Ana Bermudez is on our board. When I think about the people who are here thinking so thoughtfully about impact and scale, the Raise the Age, it goes beyond New York City and all the way to upstate New York. And within that process, we're also thinking very deeply that Ana Bermudez also chairs our scaling committee. I'm just highlighting the next depth of layer, which is when we're going to effectuate change, what are those policies? How do you really implement? How do you know what you know? But then what are the resources that are given to organizations and institutions and leaders that are taking on the next process of ensuring that those who are impacted are not just giving representation, but access resources to make substantial advancement.